landfill rather than take it to the appropriate low-level radioactive waste disposal site. And there's a lot of detailed, and not just anecdotes, examples of the dangers of those facilities. One in Ohio was just recently shut down, and the Attorney General launched an investigation. So that is a very concerning waste stream. And yes, you must pay attention to it.
But you do agree that some of those waste streams from a radiological standpoint are significantly different than the waste streams that you might see in Mexico in the Permian Basin. If the values of 200 picocuries per liter are truly the values that we see in produced water and not 9,000.
If you have produced water at 200 picocuries per liter, the sludge accumulated out of that tank of produced water, yes, we'd expect the levels to be lower than the Marcellus, but it still would be a radiological hazard. And again, I point back to the EPA drinking water paper, because they're processing water with maybe 5 or 6 picocuries per liter, and still their residuals can have quite elevated levels of radioactivity. So 200 is much higher than that. We'd still expect it to be problematic.
So it needs to be addressed.
Absolutely.
But it's not as difficult maybe as the two examples that you had out of West Virginia and Pennsylvania that have relatively significantly higher levels than we do here.
I mean, again, I don't think I have enough authority to say it's less important. It is a hazard. If the limit, is something like 5 picocuries per gram, and the sludge has radium at 10,000 or 25,000, that's still, wildly above certain guidelines that EPA has set. So I guess I'm wary of saying it's less dangerous. I think it still would be dangerous even at 200.
I didn't say less dangerous. I said maybe less complicated to handle. And
yeah, and I appreciate the tone of the questioning, but I still, being the skeptical journalist, would say I think I need to see, for example, let's look at the sludge. Let's look at the sludge let's go to a produced water treatment facility. Apparently there's 205 operating in New Mexico, at least registered. And let's look at a facility that's been going, not just a shiny new one, but going for a couple of years. And let's take a sample of the sludge at the bottom of one of their brine tanks that hasn't been cleaned for a bit. And then we would start to learn data that would make me more confident in answering some of these questions.
I agree. I think that's appropriate. And I'm finished. Thank you very much. Did I do better on the questions this time?
Yes. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Davis. Terrific. Ms. Fox. Thank you. And Mr. Knight. Okay.
I can do better with the microphone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Approaching
Please.
it slowly and cautiously.
Yes. And please, everyone, just try to remain steady in front of your mics.
Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon. And you mentioned the fact that produced water is not classified as a hazardous waste under RCRA. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But that doesn't mean that other federal and state regulations wouldn't apply to produced water. Is that right?
What do you mean by other?
So, for instance, wouldn't such things as the Clean Water Act, the Occupational Safety and Health Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, as well as other state acts and regulations still apply?
Yeah. Yes, certainly.
So, you would agree with me that it isn't necessary for something to be classified as a RCRA hazardous waste in order to have protective criteria, correct?
I think the problem here, unfortunately, you mentioned OSHA. OSHA has been largely absent from these facilities. OSHA has enabled absolutely horrific practices to occur at these facilities. Certainly, OSHA can be one organization that, if it is vigilant, can be protective of workers, but I have not found that to be the case in my reporting. And so this early declaration of hazardousness ends up being very important. And when it is not granted, in my opinion, it creates room for quite a lot of sloppiness and inattention down the line. So this is why I stress it and focus on it so much.
I certainly agree with you on worker safety. But there, again, you'd agree that there are other mechanisms when we're discussing the protection of human health and the environment that extend beyond RCRA.
Absolutely.
And I believe you said that you were not aware of New Mexico's specific regulations for the protection of workers from NORM, or I think more correctly, T-norm, as it's from produced water in the oil and gas industry, which are codified in 20.3.14 of the New Mexico Administrative Code. You weren't aware of those when you wrote your testimony, is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
And you are aware that there are, or are you aware that there are other divisions and bureaus within the New Mexico Environment Department that specifically oversee worker safety?
Yeah. Yeah. Certainly. Okay.
That's all my questions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And these are matters I'll be looking into more. So I appreciate you bringing them up. Thank you for the question.
thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Knight. Mr. Nasi, do you have any follow-up?
Just a couple. Mr. Noble, Ms. Sheehan asked you if your testimony has been backed up by studies, both in your testimony or that is referred to in your testimony. And I was wondering if, for instance, in your rebuttal, you can talk about some of the studies that you referred to and what they're about.
Well, I think some of the most relevant studies have to do with some really clever ways in which researchers in Pennsylvania have assessed the environment to determine if radioactivity from oil field waste has indeed entered the environment. So looking, very simple studies have been conducted. And again, you have one of the world experts on this topic, I believe, coming to testify. But if a facility has a discharge point, you can test the sediment at the point of discharge. You can test just upstream of the discharge. You can test just downstream of the discharge. And if radioactivity levels are significantly higher right at the discharge and just downstream than just upstream, this can be an important indication that this discharge may be maybe enhancing the radioactivity of the environment. Another study, and I mentioned this one, has to do with looking at freshwater mussels. There's a number of important bioindicators. Oysters are one. If you're in an estuarine environment and in a freshwater stream environment, freshwater mussels can be really important. And this paper that just came out by researchers at Penn State University, they look at the tissue of freshwater mussels and determine that there are elevated levels of radium downstream of centralized waste treatment facilities. And not only that, but that these radioactive signatures linger in the environment even for years. And I mentioned this, there was a concerning practice of bringing produced water to sewage plants. That practice was stopped, and yet the researchers still found that the signatures linger years later. So some of these, I think these are really important papers. Another one that comes to mind is a USGS study done in North Dakota where there was a brine spill. And the researchers tracked radium downstream with the creek. And they actually looked in a floodplain about 4.5 miles downstream and found that even 4.5 miles downstream, radium had accumulated in the floodplain at levels that were above EPA cleanup standards. And that's alarming because that is, again, providing a pathway into the environment. And so we now can confirm radium moves through the environment when oil field wastewater, produced water is spilled or inappropriately discharged.
So I'm just going to give you two examples, Exhibit 12 and Exhibit 13 that's attached to your rebuttal testimony that was filed in May of this year. Those are two of the several studies that you referred to. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
I have one last area, and that is that essentially boil down all your amazing testimony that you've proffered today, you are pleading with this commission to require that safety standards be included in a rule going forward, and that it particularly address norm and the impacts to workers. Is that correct?
That's correct.
No further questions. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Mr. Nasi. Any reason not to excuse Mr. Noble? Oh, Commissioner Branker.
I'm sorry, Madam Hearing Officer, members of the commission, but during the course of this, I just made the mistake of reading one of the exhibits that Mr. Noble has relied on, and it was major part of the discussion with Ms. Sheehan, which is this, if I understand, Mr. Noble, the only real study concerning the Permian Basin, Exhibit 5 on radioactivity, correct?
Yeah, and can you just read the title of that scientific study?
Occurrence and behavior of uranium and thorium series radionuclides in the Permian Shale hydraulic fracturing waste.
Yes.
And you referred to that study numerous times in your direct testimony.
Because as I'm aware, and apparently now there exists other data of radium signature in produced water, but as I was aware, this was one of the only peer-reviewed science publications detailing levels of radium in produced water. So that is why, to me, this is indeed an important study.
And your conclusion was that the levels, and I don't know how you converted from becquerels to picocuries, but
multiply it by 27.
Okay, that's what I looked it up on the internet. That's what I came up with. So, okay. These are concerning levels of radium in oil field wastes in Permian Basin. That was your conclusion?
Well, they're above various limits as we've laid out.
And can you get to that report?
Yeah. I got it. Okay, so I've just drawn it up now.
Okay, can you get to the end?
Do you mean the conclusion?
Yes, the conclusion.
Okay, I'm there.
Okay, in the last paragraph, I can read the first two sentences, or you can read the first two sentences.
These elevated levels are of radiological significance and represent a major source of radium in the environment. However,
Okay. Next sentence.
However, the risk assessment study indicates that there is little or limited potential for radiation exposure to the public and workers from the oil and gas development. That's a fine statement. I would disagree vigorously with it.
Okay, and the final sentence, I'll ignore the numbers. The resulting dose from the activity concentration in oil field waters are well below the natural background radiation dose and the NRC limit effective dose limit per year for the general public.
No, you're reading it correctly. I am not relying on this study because I agree with their conclusions. I'm relying on it because the paper contains important data.
Okay, but they use that data then in a risk assessment, and their conclusion, the risk assessment is that there's little or no danger.
And that's absolutely appropriate for you all to pay attention to, and that's their conclusions. But I would run that by Dr. Abir Vengash, and I would run it by other people. But yes, certainly that's their conclusions. I don't necessarily agree. I think there's a lot of ways to assess or not assess pathways and come up with conclusions. One of the studies I cite was done by the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. This is where we get the numbers that I've been bringing up, an average radium level of 9,330 picocuries per liter. And yet the conclusion to that study is there is little or limited potential for exposure. Now, what I have found, and call me cynical, But often these studies will have conclusions that say that there is not risk, but in the data and in the guts of the study, I think there is often reason to be quite alarmed. That same Pennsylvania study actually expresses risk to a number of different workers from radiological exposure. And yet, yes, that is their conclusion. So I think it's appropriate to highlight it, but I focus on the data in the study. And that's why I bring this study up.
Thank you.
Okay, any reason not to excuse Mr. Noble and take a break? Yes? Oh. Okay, Commissioner Fry.
So your redirect or your council's redirect, you said request safety standards and norm standards as they apply to workers. Do I have that correct?
Say that again?
That you request safety standards and norm standards as they apply to workers.
Absolutely.
Do you have a short version of what those would entail?
I don't have that, and I know I'm being handed it right now, but I don't think I'm ready to like immediately produce exactly what those would entail. I think I'd be happy to be part of that discussion as an advisor to New Energy Economy, because I do think, you know, my time with workers could provide some insight, but I can't tell you right now exactly what that should look like.
Okay, but it would include PPE and that kind of thing.
Certainly, that would be foremost, yes. And also controlled zones. So there are areas where levels are higher and different protocols have to be carried out in those zones. And in other levels, in other areas where levels are lower, there can be different protocols. At some of the facilities I mentioned, workers were eating lunch right in you know, the space where there's significant contamination. That's a very easy thing to change with a significant, you know, public health outcome.
All right, thank you for your testimony. Thank you, Madam Hearing.
All right, thank you. All right, it looks like we can excuse you now, Mr. Noble. Thank you, Ms. Nanasi.
Thank you.
Let's take 15 minutes.
Thank you.
How did I do what? I didn't do it. That's her. All right, we are back after a short break. We'll aim for getting as much done as we can before 5:30, and then we will have to quickly vacate the room. So let's see what we can fit in the next 60 to 70 minutes. Ms. Olson, I see you at the table there.
Yes, good afternoon, Madam Hearing Officer and Commissioners. So I think things have gotten a little jumbled with shuffling parties around to accommodate everybody. But NMOGA is prepared to present its first witness, Missy Courier, who I understand is on WebEx.
All right, Ms. Courier, can you hear us?
Yes, ma'am, I'm here.
Terrific. If you would please spell your first and last name for the transcript.
Yes, ma'am. My name is Missy Courier, Missicurrier.
Thank you. And do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Olson.
Good afternoon, Miss Courier. It's a little awkward trying to look way up at you, but I'll do my best. So you've already stated and spelled your name for the record. Can you please state your current professional position?
Yes, I'm the president and CEO of the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association.
And I believe the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association is commonly referred to as NMOGA throughout this hearing. Can you just give a brief overview of what is NMOGA?
Yes, NMOGA is a trade association that works with elected officials, community leaders, industry experts, and the general public to advocate for responsible oil and natural gas policies and increase public understanding of industry operations and contributions to the state.
Ms. Courier, would you slow down,
Yes, ma'am.
please?
Yes, sorry. Would you like me to repeat that?
No, just slow down.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And how many members does NMOGA have?
We represent over 180 member companies.
And can you please summarize your professional experience prior to becoming the CEO and president of NMOGA?
Yes, ma'am. Prior to my current role, I have primarily worked throughout the Permian Basin in community and legislative affairs roles for numerous industries, including WIP, the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, as well as ExxonMobil and community relations. Most recently, I was a contract lobbyist as well as the president of the Economic Development Corporation of Lee County in New Mexico.
And in your capacity as the current CEO and president of NMOGA, is it necessary for you to understand the position of your members on issues impacting the industry?
Yes, ma'am.
How do you go about determining what the position is of NMOGA and its members?
Consensus is reached through committees that are made up of member companies' subject matter experts. And we also consult with other experts who have extensive technology, who have extensive knowledge of current and innovative technologies. In addition, we work through the committee process and when necessary, take committee's recommendations to the full board of directors for them to determine either a position or a direction for the trade to go.
And as part of your responsibilities, do you represent and speak on behalf of NMOGA on issues that are important to your membership in the oil and gas industry?
Yes, ma'am.
Have you had an opportunity to review the reuse rules that were proposed by the New Mexico Environment Department?
Yes, I have.
And does NMOGA consider the reuse rules to be important to its membership in the oil and gas industry?
Yes, ma'am. Member companies have decided that the rule is very important, not only for their individual businesses, but finding ways to further diversify the economy throughout the state.
And can you elaborate on why NMOGA and its membership considers this an important rulemaking?
NMOGA member companies have a vested interest in protecting the environment, which includes the responsible use of water resources in the state, practical rules that allow for reuse and encourage the continued development of advanced technologies and data collection. Water reuse is critical to supplement the water resources in New Mexico, ensuring sustainability and resilience. NMOGA members, of course, want a good rule that will guide and provide the structure and standards needed to conduct useful pilots and ultimately allow safe water reuse when and where appropriate. It is very important that we get the first step in the rule process right for the state, and that oil and gas operators who are trying to solve this issue can continue to move forward on behalf of all of us that are proud to live and work in New Mexico.
And this rule has been contemplated for a while. Has NMOGA been tracking the department's development of this rule?
Yes, ma'am. NMOGA first read through the rules, of course, in 2023 and provided written comment on December 1st, 2023.
And is your understanding that was before the New Mexico Environment Department petitioned the Water Quality Control Commission to adopt a new rule?
Yes, ma'am.
And then we've learned throughout this proceeding, and I think it's in the record, that NMED filed a petition to the Water Quality Control Commission proposing its initial version of the reuse rules on December 27th, 2023. Did you review the December 27th, 2023 version of the reuse rules?
Yes, as well as our member companies and the committee that worked on these rules.
And did NMOGA support that version of the reuse rules?
NMOGA did support the December 2023 version of the reuse rules.
And why did NMOGA support that version?
Our member companies felt that it was a reasonable rule that balanced the need for reuse of treated produced water while also protecting the environment. It does so by allowing discharge permits and utilizes the existing protections in that rule.
Has NMOGA evaluated the benefits of reuse of treated produced water?
Yes, ma'am. A vast majority of our member companies who have a vested interest in produced water for a number of reasons have evaluated the benefits.
And does NMOGA oppose the department's proposed prohibition of discharge of raw produced water?
Yes.
Or is NMOGA seeking the ability to discharge raw or untreated produced water?
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry if I misunderstood your question.
And sorry, can you elaborate what NMOGA's position is on discharge of raw or untreated produced water?
Absolutely. So for water, for discharge that has not been treated, there are certainly concerns that that discharge would go into places that it shouldn't be, and we would not, of course, support that. But for water that has been appropriately treated and meets appropriate scientific standards, we would support discharge where science says that it's applicable for that to happen, and ensure that we are meeting the standards that should, and we hope that the Water Quality Control Commission will set.
The court reporter is asking us to slow down just a little bit.
Yes, ma'am.
Has NMOGA evaluated the benefits of reuse of treated produced water?
Yes, and as it's been discussed several times throughout the hearing, water, of course, is one of the most important resources that we have in New Mexico. And while water is lacking for our state, we have been given a formation that not only provides a third of the revenue for the state, but also produces more water than any other formation. Industry has always found ways to rely on that water for reuse and its own development activities. But if we can safely and efficiently treat the water for reuse in other areas, we can help to solve the broader water issues in the state. Limiting excess water injection will also help with deep water injection induced seismicity events.
And now I want to just turn briefly to discuss the first amended reuse rules. on March 21st, 2024, NMED filed its first amended petition and statement of reasons. Have you reviewed the first amended reuse rules?
Yes, NMOGA member companies have reviewed the amended rules.
And does NMOGA support the department's first amended reuse rules?
No, ma'am. We very much support water reuse, but not the rules as currently written.
And can you elaborate on why NMOGA doesn't support the amended reuse rules?
Unfortunately, the first amended reuse rules filed by NMED on March 20th, 2024 fundamentally changed the proposed rules to prevent reuse of treated produced water, and it did so in what we feel are 3 different ways. Number 1, it removed the language that would have allowed a person to obtain a discharge permit for treated produced water. Number 2, it removed similar language that would have allowed a person to obtain a discharge permit for treated produced water. And the third reason is the removal of the placeholder for water quality criteria for discharge of treated produced water from the proposed rules.
And can you discuss the impact that the prohibition on discharge permits for treated produced water would have on NMOGA and its members?
We feel that NMOGA members will be faced with seeking alternatives in other states, which of course would further impact the opportunity for quality New Mexican jobs, of course include and hurt revenue and other opportunities for New Mexico communities and schools, and also would hinder our opportunity for further economic diversification and potentially actually increase our reliance on the oil and gas industry, since we don't have the opportunity to further diversify.
And briefly, I want to just discuss demonstration projects. One of the provisions of the proposed reuse rules is designed to allow demonstration projects to allow industry to develop data release to reuse of produced water. Are you familiar with any demonstration projects that are being conducted by NMOGA's members?
Yes, ma'am, with permitting and working closely with departments that regulate pilot projects.
And can you just provide an example of a demonstration project that's currently being conducted by NMOGA members?
We have worked with member companies such as Pesco, Hillcore, Infinity Water Solutions, Devon, and others that have worked with NMED, MNERD, the New Mexico Produced Water Consortium, New Mexico Tech, and others to conduct pilot projects in New Mexico and the San Juan and Permian basins. There are other companies who are hopeful to work with the New Mexico Economic Development Department and other local communities to invest in our state and deploy technologies to safely and responsibly reutilize water resources.
And based on your experience, are the benefits to New Mexico for a demonstration project, are there benefits in New Mexico for a demonstration project to be conducted in the state?
Yes, ma'am. In addition to preserving fresh water, it allows the opportunity for further business investment in New Mexico, diversifying the economy and decreasing the state's budgetary reliance on the oil and gas industry.
And are there additional benefits?
Yes, we truly believe that there would be an increased quality job opportunities. There would be continued protection of environmental resources. There would be enhanced educational opportunities at the K through 12 and post-secondary levels. There would also be improved quality of life due to an increase in those job opportunities, as well as an increased tax revenue for the state coffers.
And given the location of a number of NMOGA members, do they have the option to conduct these demonstration projects in either New Mexico or Texas?
Yes, with Texas currently being more preferable due to the options of water reuse across the state border.
So if the commission adopts the amended version of the proposal, which puts in place a prohibition on discharge permits for treated produced water, do anticipate that will impact NMOGA members' willingness to conduct these demonstration projects in New Mexico as opposed to Texas?
Yes, ma'am. And as all of you know, the Permian Basin, of course, spans from Texas to New Mexico. New Mexico is very fortunate to have high quality shale rock, which is what allows us to drill one of the cleanest barrels of oil in the world. And because of that opportunity to drill, many of our businesses operate in both Texas and New Mexico. As we consider these rules and as we move forward, if we have the opportunity for pilot projects and economic diversification to take place on the New Mexico side of the border, that will ensure that we not only are able to regulate those projects to the highest standards determined by the commission and others, but also ensure that we are able to benefit from the tax revenues that comes from those businesses. So it's not only an economic win, but an economical one as well.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Courier. I have no further questions, Madam Hearing Officer and members of the commission. I will tender Ms. Courier for cross-examination if you all or any other parties have questions.
Thank you, Ms. Olson. Commissioner Vehil, do you have questions of Ms. Courier? Thank you. Commissioner Bernkert,
No questions.
Commissioner Bayless, Chair Thompson.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your testimony. You mentioned that the Texas regulations on produced water treatment are allow reuse. Can you give us a citation so that I can look those up?
No, sir, no specific citation that I can provide, but would be happy to look up any mention. I will say, sir, that there is also a Texas Produced Water Consortium, and that water consortium is allowed to do additional pilot projects such as opportunities around agriculture. For example, utilizing produced water clean produced water on cotton and other agricultural options that are not for consumption. So while I don't have any specific citations, we do know that the pilot projects that are being conducted in Texas have a little bit more leeway than what we currently have options for in New Mexico.
Thank you. Madam Hearing Officer, can I ask council if they are going to have experts that are going to testify to this in the future?
Yes.
Ms. Olson?
Yes, Chair Thompson. I believe that our witness, Mike McCurdy, is on the Texas Consortium, if I'm not mistaken, and I believe he's prepared to address some of the things that are happening in Texas, but I will ask that he also be prepared with a citation.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Dominguez.
No questions, Madam Hearing Officer.
Thank you. Commissioner McWilliams.
No questions.
Commissioner Patton.
No questions.
Commissioner Fry.
Yes, I have a question. You were talking about the original version of the rules would allow diversification in ways the second one does not. Do you have like the 3-sentence version of what that is?
Yes, ma'am.
Hold on a second.
I'm sorry.
She had said that, or I was asking about, let's see here. The original version would allow diversification that the first amended rules would not. And I'm asking just for like a couple sentences about what that diversification looks like. I don't have much choice.
Go ahead, Ms. Courier.
Thank you. So with the removal of the discharge permit language, as well as the removal of the placeholder for the water quality criteria, that does not provide the regulatory security that a company would need to invest dollars in New Mexico to do multi-million level pilot projects. So with the inclusion of the discharge permit, as well as the option for the water quality criteria, that would provide opportunities for companies to have the stability to know that they have the option to invest in New Mexico and stay in New Mexico.
And what kind of pilot projects would those be?
Several of those pilot projects are companies that are already working with the New Mexico Water Consortium, as well as with NMED. For example, one of our member companies, which is two of our member companies, Pesco and Hillcore, which operate in the San Juan Basin, are working closely together to not only determine how that water can be reused safely throughout the state, but also limit the amount of fresh water that's used in post-production opportunities. And as we can find ways to scale the economic opportunities around water, that will allow other companies to follow suit. It will also find ways to, if a strategic water supply was passed by the legislature and moved forward with the governor's support, then these type of water projects would allow for companies to invest in opportunities like the strategic water supply, which would not only further the state's economic base, but also find additional jobs as well as additional revenues for the cities and counties where the pilot projects would be placed.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And then
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question for Madam Hearing Officer and Council. I am not finding her testimony at all. And I know we have so many documents. Can you point me to the right direction so I can look at it?
Yes, so Namoga has offered Ms. Courier as a non-technical testimony, so she doesn't have pre-filed written direct testimony because that's a requirement just for technical witnesses, and her testimony is non-technical.
Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Armstrong.
Thank you. Just one question following up on Chair Thompson's question, and if it's more appropriate for a later witness, I understand that. I believe I've found the document that Ms. Courier is mentioning in Texas. There's a January 8th, 2024 Railroad Commission of Texas document on the produced water beneficial reuse framework for pilot study authorization. Is that the correct document?
Sir, I know that the regulations go through the Texas Railroad Commission, but I'm not sure if that is a specific document. So I will defer to later folks that will have a better understanding of that.
Okay, just one really high level question then, because it might not be specific in this document, but it might be somewhere else. Are discharges of treated produced water allowed in Texas?
At this point, no, sir, they are not. That is something the Texas Water Consortium is looking at, as well as the Railroad Commission is helping to determine. Timing wise, I actually think that's very grateful that the commission is considering discharge, as well as, well, I'm sorry, I know that this version of the rule does not consider discharge, but I'm grateful that the rules are being considered right now in New Mexico. In Texas, they will go into legislative session in January. And of course, they have the option to go into a rulemaking prior to that. But if Texas has more robust either laws or regulations that would allow for discharge and pilot projects, we do fear that New Mexico would lose out on a fantastic revenue stream if all of the companies chose to do their pilot projects and further develop on the Texas side of the border and not in New Mexico.
Thanks. Do you have any indication that Texas is on that path in the immediate future?
With the Texas Water Consortium, they are very far behind the New Mexico Water Consortium, but thanks to our water consortium, New Mexico's water consortium being willing to work closely with Texas, Texas has made great strides. Texas tends to be a little more friendly environment toward the oil and gas industry. And due to that friendliness, there seems to be a sense right now that Texas is more willing to work with some of those companies to ensure that the pilot projects stay there and not go to other states.
Okay, I think that's all I have.
Right, Commissioner Rosatos.
Thank you. I don't have any questions.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. Let me turn to the parties. Mr. Maxwell, do you have questions of Ms. Courier?
Thank you for being here, Miss Courier. Your Honor, I have no questions for this witness.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor? Thank you. Mr. Cox?
I have no questions, Madam Hearing Officer.
All right. Mr. Hightower, I think I saw him exit the room. Mr. Davis? Okay, thank you. Ms. Nanasi or Mr. Dodd?
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. And just for the record, I've emailed a couple of exhibits to Ms. Jones to be pulled up because I didn't realize that this witness was going to be on WebEx. I have hard copies, but I just sent them so that she can pull them up.
All right. Trust Pam is working on that.
We don't need them just yet.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Ms. Courier.
Hello, sir.
You are the president and CEO of Nemoga.
Yes, sir.
And so you speak on behalf of Nemoga, right?
Yes, sir.
Your testimony today is on behalf of Nemoga.
Yes, sir.
And it is the position of Nemoga that New Mexico needs additional water supplies, right?
It is the position of Nemoga that we support water reuse, but not as the rule is currently proposed.
One of the facts that Nemoga is presenting in support of or in opposition to the currently proposed rule is talking about how New Mexico has water scarcity and needs additional water supplies, correct?
Yes, sir. In reference specifically to fresh water.
Okay. Nemoga agrees that water scarcity and groundwater depletion are forecasted to grow even more severe due to climate change, correct?
Yes, sir, which is one of the reasons why we support water reuse.
Does Nemoga agree that climate change is due in large part to emissions caused by the use of oil and gas?
Nemoga does agree that oil and gas does affect climate change, yes.
So you would agree that water scarcity and groundwater depletion caused by climate change are problems that Nemoga and its members have contributed to?
Yes, they have contributed to utilizing water, which is why we are seeking solutions.
But not only utilizing water, but also impacting and exacerbating climate change, correct?
No, not exasperating climate change due to us having the opportunity to continue to drill one of the cleanest barrels of oil in the world and finding technologies that reduce water use as well as cleaner drilling options.
So I'm sorry, earlier, just a moment ago, I asked you if Nemoga agreed that climate change is due in large part to emissions caused by the use of oil and gas, and you agreed with that, did you not?
Yes, sir.
And so the resulting water scarcity and groundwater depletion caused by climate change is also problems that Nemoga and its members have contributed to through producing oil and gas for consumption, correct?
We have contributed to, but not exasperated. Yes, sir.
Okay. But now what you're saying is that you're from the oil and gas industry and you're here to help. Is that right?
Yes, sir, just like we've said for many years.
You're claiming that you can help save the environment from a problem that you helped create.
No, we are claiming that we have technologies that would better utilize water that has been cleaned to the standards that we hope that the commission will set. And the reutilization of that water will protect and preserve other water resources that are scarce within New Mexico.
I want to shift gears and I want to talk about finances. How much money has NMOGA contributed to produced water research?
NMOGA itself has not provided any money toward produced water. We are a member of the New Mexico Produced Water Consortium, but we do not provide any money directly for research.
Now, how much money has NMOGA budgeted to spend on these regulatory proceedings concerning the reuse rule?
We have budgeted for our attorneys, and that's the only thing that we have budgeted for.
And how much is that?
I do not have that number available at this point.
More than $100,000?
No, sir. I'm sorry.
Hold on. Mr. Don, how is this relevant?
Madam Hearing Officer, I think that it's extremely relevant to the credibility of this witness and this party that they have not contributed a single dollar to produced water research and yet are spending tons and tons of money to litigate this proceeding. I think that that goes to the credibility of this witness, which is fair game in cross-examination.
Okay, so I understand the point you want to make about the way NMOGA spends its monies, but I don't believe it goes to her personal credibility. So please move on.
Can I just respond very briefly? And I don't want to argue with the bench. Just simply, I did lay sort of a foundation that this witness is here speaking on behalf of NMOGA, not in her personal capacity.
I understand. Please move on.
I want to ask you about an op-ed that you wrote regarding the reuse rule, okay?
Yes, sir.
And Ms. Jones, at this point, did you receive my email? If you could please pull up Exhibit NG-15, and I have hard copies for members of the commission. May I approach? Ms. Courier, you recognize this document, correct?
Yes, sir.
You wrote this op-ed,
Yes, sir.
and it was published on May 3rd, 2024 in the Carlsbad Current Argus.
Yes, sir. I believe so. The words are a little bit blurred on the screen, so I believe that that's the date.
The small font is blurred.
Yes, sorry, just the small font, and I'm kind of blind.
Okay. Now I'd like to direct your attention to a public comment that was submitted in this case on May 28th, 2024. Ms. Jones, if you could please pull up the public comment that was included in my email. And I have copies for the commission as well. May I approach, Madam Chair? Ms. Courier, this is a public comment that was entered into the record on May 28th, 2024 by members of the New Mexico Senate. If you could give me just one moment. And I'd like you to just read a few of the paragraphs or a few of the sentences which I've highlighted for us. Ms. Jones, could you please flip back to the other document, NG 15? If you could read, Ms. Courier, that first highlighted section right there.
All viable and safe options to address our declining water availability should be considered, including finding ways to safely use treated produced water.
Now, Ms. Jones, if you could please switch to the other document and go to the second highlighted provision on that document. Right there. Ms. Courier, could you please read that second highlighted sentence in this public comment document?
All viable and safe options to address New Mexico's scarce and declining water availability should be considered, including finding ways to safely utilize treated produced water.
Ms. Jones, could you please switch to the other document? And could you scroll down to the next highlighted section, please? Ms. Courier, could you please read that second highlighted section or the first highlighted section that's present on the screen right now?
Due to technological advancements, produced water could be used for industrial applications such as municipal landscaping, road construction, and irrigation for non-edible agriculture like cotton.
And Ms. Jones, could you please switch to the other document now? Ms. Courier, could you please read the third highlighted section on this document?
Technical advancements allow the safe reuse of produced water for industrial applications such as municipal landscaping, road construction, and irrigation for non-edible agriculture like cotton.
And Ms. Jones, could you flip back to the other document, please? And Ms. Courier, could you please read the last highlighted section on this document?
Every gallon of treated produced water used for irrigation or industrial uses frees up a gallon of native fresh water.
And if you could please, Ms. Jones, flip to the public comment document to the first highlighted section. Ms. Courier, could you please read the first highlighted section on the public comment document?
Every gallon of treated produced water used for irrigation or industrial application frees up a gallon of native fresh water.
Ms. Courier, you would agree that phrasing between these two documents is strangely similar, would you not?
Yes, sir, it is similar.
And in fact, many of the exact same phrases are used, correct?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Courier, did you write this public comment document?
No, sir, but we did work with the signers to help them understand the importance of water reuse and provided them resources so that they could consider options to write a letter of support.
And did you send them proposed language for their letter?
Yes, which is very commonplace in public comments. For example, when asking folks to make public comment, we will often provide examples of what we would encourage folks to say, especially if they don't know what to say, if they're in a situation that they don't know a lot about. It's very commonplace, as you might know.
All right, now I want to talk about water use by the oil and gas industry in New Mexico. You have repeatedly stated in op-eds that the oil and gas industry is truly one of the few industries capable of attaining net positive water balance by saving more fresh water than it uses, correct?
Correct, yes, sir.
Can we agree that as it stands today, NMOGA's members are not even net neutral on water use?
Uh, I no, I don't. I would agree with you. No, we are not net neutral on that, which is another reason that we are hopeful to have water reuse opportunities.
Now, under the current OCD regulations, NMOGA's members can use produced water for oil and gas operations, correct?
Yes, sir. And our member companies are proud to use less than 1% of fresh water in their activities, which continues to ensure that we're, number one, protecting produced water and better utilizing our other water resources through produced water.
Okay, but NMOGA's members are still using billions of gallons of fresh water every year for their operations, are they not?
Yes, sir, which is required. The only time industry uses fresh water is when it's required by the state or the federal government. So those are regulated entities of freshwater usage.
So you're saying that no oil and gas operator in the state of New Mexico chooses to use fresh water instead of reuse produced water simply for financial considerations?
Madam Hearing
I-
Examiner,
Hold on, Ms. Courier. Ms. Olson?
I'm going to object to this question. He's asking about all oil and gas operators in New Mexico. Ms. Courier is here only on behalf of NMOGA members. And additionally, I just want to remind council that Ms. Courier is here as a non-technical fact witness. And so to the extent he has policy questions about NMOGA, I think those are appropriate, but to the extent he's getting into technical details, she is not a technical witness.
All right. So Mr. Dodd, I do remember her statement that she said she was here on behalf of the 180 members. Ms. Courier, right? We're paying attention to the difference between you speaking on behalf of your members and speaking on behalf of all operators. And also, as you know, Mr. Dodd, NMOGA has other witnesses, at least 3 of them, I think, and at least 1 or 2 of them are technical.
Sure, I'll rephrase the question.
All right.
Ms. Courier, are you testifying today that not a single NMOGA member uses fresh water rather than reused produced water in its operations for economic purposes?
I am testifying that our members that we represent utilize fresh water when required by the state or federal government.
But also sometimes when it's economically advantageous, correct?
Not to my knowledge, sir.
Okay. Given that NMOGA's members are not even net neutral on use of water, wouldn't you agree that talking about net positive is simply conjecture at this point? That it could possibly someday be possible because you're not even yet neutral?
I agree that water reuse rules are necessary to ensure that companies can continue to take steps forward to become neutral and ultimately net positive by utilizing water resources that are produced water and have the opportunity to continue to do so in new ways that limit freshwater usage at a greater level.
That's all the questions I have. Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer.
Thank you, Mr. Dodd. Ms. Fox? Thank you, Mr. Knight. All right, thank you very much. Ms. Olson, any follow-up?
Oh, I'm sorry. I have no follow-up.
Okay, thank you. Any reason not to excuse Ms. Courier? Great. Thank you very much for your testimony, Ms. Courier.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Examiner and Commissioners.
Great. Is it worthwhile to spend the next 25 minutes or so laying some groundwork?
I would suggest maybe for efficiency's sake, without having to pull up PowerPoints and stuff, that I could just walk through authentication of Mr. D'Antonio's testimony.
Terrific.
And I understand, just for the benefit of the commissioners, that a number of witnesses from Namoga and I believe the remaining other witness, Mr. Van Gosh, have competing conflicts. And so I will start with Mr. D'Antonio, but you probably won't see him again for a day or two, depending on how things progress tomorrow.
All right. So, Mr. D'Antonio, if you would please spell your first and last name for the transcripts.
Yes, good. Madam Examiner, Commissioners, my name is John D'Antonio, John D'Antonio.
And Mr. D'Antonio, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth? Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Olson.
Good afternoon, Mr. D'Antonio. You've already stated and spelled your name. Can you please state your current profession?
Yes, my current profession, I'm a water resource consultant with my own business, American West Water Advisors, LLC. I also work part-time for Wilson and Company, architect and engineers in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
And for efficiency, I'm going to share my notebook with you just for this part. So I've put before you what's been marked as Namoga Exhibit 2. Do you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
Is this your direct technical testimony that was pre-filed in this matter?
Yes.
And was this technical testimony prepared by you or under your direct supervision?
Yes, it was.
Do you have any substantive changes to that testimony?
No, I do not.
And is that testimony true and accurate to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, it is.
If you were asked these same questions today under oath, would your responses be the same?
Yes, they would be.
And turn to the next document. I'm putting before you what's previously been marked as Namoga Exhibit 9. Do you recognize that as your rebuttal technical testimony that was pre-filed in this matter?
Yes, I do.
And was this technical testimony prepared by you or under your direct supervision?
Yes, it was.
Do you have any substantive changes to your rebuttal testimony?
No, I do not.
Is the rebuttal technical testimony true and accurate to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, it is.
And if you were asked these same questions today under oath, would your responses be the same?
Yes, they would be.
So we've gone through that. At this time, I'm happy to admit these exhibits into evidence, or I'm happy to wait until Mr. D'Antonio has gone through his summary and cross-examination.
Let's see exhibits, please.
So we've got Namoga Exhibit 2, Namoga Exhibit 9. I would also offer Namoga Exhibit 5, which is the resume of Mr. D'Antonio, and Namoga Exhibit 8, which is the oil and gas natural produced water governance in the state of New Mexico document referenced in Mr. D'Antonio's testimony.
All right, let me check with the parties. Are there objections to the admission of Namoga Exhibits 2, 5, 8, or 9? Well, I'm not hearing any objections, so they're admitted.
Okay, and I apologize. I would also move to admit Namoga Exhibit 1, which are the proposed changes that I believe Mr. D'Antonio also sponsored in his testimony.
All right, any objection to the admission of Namoga Exhibit 1? Exhibit 1 is admitted.
Madam Hearing Officer, at this point, I would suggest we stop because I think it might take a little bit to get the direct testimony PowerPoint up, and I would hate to interrupt Mr. D'Antonio's presentation summary of his testimony.
All right, thank you. And I know it would be hard to kind of keep a thread. So, but thank you so much for waiting for us, Mr. D'Antonio. And thank you, Ms. Olson. I can do one thing here at the end of the day. I saw a motion filed and managed to read it regarding Commissioner Bayless. Unlike the other disqualification motion that was filed, this one seemed to be nearly purely legal, and I happen to be familiar with the law on this point. So I'm just going to go ahead and rule on this one. The motion is denied. I would direct the movements to both statute, section 74-6-3A6, where it says the director of state parks may serve on the commission himself or may designate a member of his staff. That's the exact words. Commissioner Bayless introduced himself as a member of Mr. Valeskis's staff. Also to a case I was involved in a long time ago, Phelps Dodge Tyrone at 140 NM 464. That case proceeded over 5 weeks of hearing so long before the commission that there were changes in personnel along the way among the designees, and the appellant, Phelps Dodge, made a point of that before the Court of Appeals, and the Court of Appeals said that that was actually not prejudicial to the appellant. And then as to the third point I saw in that motion on the filing of a financial disclosure, Commissioner Bayless has described briefly to me what will be on it. No surprises, and assures me that he'll have that filled out very soon. He was working with Pam earlier today to try to get that filed. So, Commissioner Bayless, would you like to say another word of introduction and to put on the record the same statement that a lot of the other commissioners had made regarding whether you have a conflict of interest?
Thank you. I have no conflict. I have no conflict. I will be filing my disclosure form this morning, for tomorrow morning. And it should be all said, done and dusted by tomorrow.
Did you want to make it? You said you wanted to make another word of introduction, I think.
I thought about that.
No pressure. All right.
Not a problem. I was just going to give more of my personal background, and I don't think that's too important.
Okay. Is there anything else then that we can do before we adjourn for the evening? Again, tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., we'll accept public comment. We never know exactly how many folks will be signed up for that. And then we'll return to, let's see here, Dr. Van Gogh, and then back to Namoga. Is there anything else we could talk about while we're still together in the room tonight?
Madam Hearing Officer, one possibly quick thing that could get resolved, and I would seek your direction on Namoga replace the demonstrative summaries for a couple of the witnesses, I think is primarily to correct a few typos, animation issues, and I'm not entirely sure each of us have worked with a couple of the witnesses. I believe I saw an email coming in with objections to that. And so to expedite things for doing those PowerPoint, I would just ask for direction from you on how to proceed.
All right. Based on your representation that these were modest adjustments, and also because they are demonstrative exhibits, please plan to use them. I will say that I've had further discussion with some of the commissioners who are disappointed that some of these exhibits, not yours, are coming in so late because it doesn't give them a chance to review them in time to formulate questions of the witnesses. So that's just a general statement applicable to everyone. But as to your corrected demonstrative exhibits, it's not a problem.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you. All right, let's adjourn for the evening and we'll see you in the morning.